It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. Afghan officials signed a peace deal on Thursday with a party led by one of the most depraved Islamist warlords, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. With this deal, he will be pardoned from the brutal attacks and war crimes he has been accused of on civilians in Afghanistan. Hekmatyar leads the militant faction of Hezb-e-Islami, which has been waging a decades-long battle to establish a unified Islamic State in Afghanistan. In the 1980s, he was an ally of the CIA in the fight against the then Soviet-backed government of Afghanistan, and later he was allied with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in the 1990s. Government officials in Afghanistan praised the accord as a step forward for peace, while critics say it opened the door to one of the most infamous figures in Afghanistan playing a role in the country's already divisive politics. Joining us today to discuss the meaning of this Afghan peace deal is Sonali Kolhatkar. She is the host of Uprising TV and the co-author of Bleeding Afghanistan, Washington Warlords and the Propaganda of Silence. Sonali, so good to have you with us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So first, let's start with the deal itself. What are the terms, meaning what is each side getting from all of this, and your thoughts on it?
Well, I think the most important part of this deal to focus on is the aspect that involves Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, which I'm glad you've honed in on as well, because it's the most egregious part of it. However, I'm not at all surprised. Afghanistan's history has been rife with essentially deal-making with and rewarding warlordism. And for years now, the US's approach to peace in Afghanistan has been to bring all of the warring and war crimes committing factions to the table. So the Afghan government, which is backed by the US and which itself is rife with members from Afghanistan's warlord past, has essentially not just pardoned Gulbuddin Hekmatyar of his crimes, but rewarded him. Essentially, he gets full immunity and amnesty from his horrific crimes that involve mass murder and mayhem. He also gets a safe area in the eastern part of Afghanistan, which he's already sort of been controlling through his own paramilitary forces. And he gets a cash prize worth some millions of dollars. This is just unbelievable for anybody who has followed Afghanistan's past, that this could be touted as somehow a way forward. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, as you mentioned, was a recipient of CIA aid. In fact, he was the largest recipient of US CIA aid in Afghanistan during the Soviet occupation. The CIA referred to him as definitely dictatorship material, and that's their quote, as well as the word fascist that they used to describe him. So the CIA knew full well what kind of a person he was when he was first brought onto the US's payroll decades ago. He was extremely ineffective against the Soviets. He ended up attacking most of his own allies. He was associated with horrific crimes against humanity. Then when the US invaded Afghanistan after September 11th, 2001, he was, for a short while, a part of the scramble to enter Kabul. He was implicated very directly in the murder of thousands of Taliban soldiers whom he left to die in an enclosed container. And then he basically joined the Taliban. So, his allegiances go back and forth. He joined the Taliban in the fight against the US. His hands are dripping with the blood of Afghan people. And how the Afghan government, which itself is horribly corrupt, can say that peace with Gulbuddin Hekmatyar means peace for the country, I have no idea. It's a massive slap in the face of ordinary Afghans.
Sonali, some people have said that Hezb-e-Islami, the party that he represents, is a relatively small group. This agreement is not that significant, they say. Will it have much impact on the conflict in Afghanistan?
Absolutely. The symbolic aspect of it is really important. He's basically saying, his part of the deal is, I won't commit crimes. So they're basically bribing him to not be a war criminal. Hekmatyar is basically saying, I will not engage in terrorism if you pay me off, if you forgive all my crimes. Who gets treated in this manner? For ordinary Afghans, the symbolic value of seeing this person, somebody who's lost their loved one because of Hekmatyar's crimes, to see him be paid off, even if his party is not a very big player in the violence, is just a terrible thing. And what it does is it says that in Afghanistan, the only people who get rewarded are the criminals, are the warlords, and are the people who have time and again been backed by other countries. I don't even know how Gulbuddin Hekmatyar is seen as loyal to Afghanistan. He's been on the side of the Soviets, on the side of the Americans, then on the side of the Taliban, and back and forth. Whoever basically gives him more money, he joins their ranks. So symbolically, it's a terrible thing. What Hekmatyar should do is stand trial for his past crimes.
And of course, this sets a precedent for all kinds of other people, not only in Afghanistan, in the region, to carry on with human rights violations and war crimes. And, we'll be able to use this as an example to renegotiate their political life in the region. What impact do you think it will have in that sense?
I mean, absolutely. This empowers the Taliban as well. And now, actually, the Taliban are gaining more and more steam. But added to the complication of what's happening in Afghanistan is the entrance of the Islamic State. This has been very much sort of an undercovered part of the Afghanistan conflict in the last few years. It's not just Syria and northern Iraq that the Islamic State has infiltrated. It's begun to appear in parts of Afghanistan as well. Whether they have the same goals as the Taliban, they likely do have the same short-term goals as the Taliban, but the long-term goals might be different. Still, the war is becoming, regardless of what this deal signifies, the war is becoming worse. And actually, whether it signals to the Taliban that they can continue committing their crimes is a good question too. But the U.S. and the Afghan government have for years been trying to lure the Taliban into a peace deal. They've set up headquarters in Pakistan, in Oman, to try to, and it's sort of been an open secret, secret talks, but they're not really that secret, to try to get the Taliban to lay down arms. Of course, the Taliban are skeptical because at the same time, the U.S. continues to bomb their forces, kill some of their leaders, and so the Taliban has been loath to do that. But look, people on the ground, the women that I work with, the Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan, women's rights and human rights leaders like Malalai Joya, they have opposed these kinds of deal makings and peace between warlords right from the start. I mean, can you imagine if in the US the KKK was given money just to stop its terrorizing during Jim Crow racism? That's essentially what it comes down to.
Sonali, what's the reaction? Early on when the story broke, I heard that there was some protest in Kabul. Did you get a sense of what was happening on the ground?
Protesting is extremely difficult on the ground in Afghanistan today. There was a brief window in the early 2000s after the initial fall of the Taliban, when some democratic sort of hallmarks of democracy began to flourish in some parts of Afghanistan, cities, etc., where there started to be a vibrant press. Not to say that the U.S. toppling of the Taliban through military means was a good thing, but the fact is that there was some opening up and some blossoming. People started to be able to have protests publicly. Today, that window has closed so badly that ordinary Afghans don't just have to worry about the US and NATO forces, but most importantly, they have to worry about the Afghan national government and the Taliban and the Islamic State when they come out whole signs and speak out. There are protests in Afghanistan, but usually they're in favor of the corrupt warlords. And they're sanctioned protests, if you will. So undoubtedly, there was some level of protest on the streets in Afghanistan. I did not see any reports of any significant protests, but that doesn't mean it's not there. There have been some good reporting, like even the New York Times actually approached an ordinary Afghan young man to ask him his opinion on Hekmatyar, and this man was traumatized by the memory of what Hekmatyar has done. So at least through some media coverage, we're seeing what ordinary Afghans actually think of this so-called peace deal.
All right, Sonali, I thank you so much for the interview. And also, if you want to know more about this warlord, you must read Sonali's book. Apparently, she writes extensively about this warlord. The Bleeding Afghanistan, Washington Warlords, and the Propaganda of Silence is the book. Look it up. Sonali, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.